Spaces in Revit represent and describe volume. Before you can place a space, your model must contain room-bounding objects. Model elements that can bind rooms are walls, floors, ceilings, roofs, and architectural columns. In the architectural model, architects place rooms. In the MEP model, spaces are used instead. A space element is essentially a database or container for mechanical and electrical analytical information. Spaces are typically placed in every room and in other areas such as chases, shafts, plenums, and so on. To place a space, switch to the Analyze ribbon. In the Spaces and Zones panel, select Space. The ribbon changes to the Modify Place Space contextual ribbon. Moving to the drawing area, I should be able to place spaces inside the enclosed areas. However, the space is not filling any of the enclosed boundaries. The reason is due to the fact that the architectural model is not room bounding at the moment. We need to define the linked model as room bounding before we can place spaces. This setting is not enabled by default. I'll click Modify to end the command. To define the linked model as room bounding, select the linked model. Next, in the Properties palette, click Edit Type to open the Type Properties dialog. Under Constraints, you can see that room bounding is the only parameter. Simply select the checkbox to enable room bounding. Then click OK to close the dialog. Click in blank space to deselect the linked model. Now, we can activate the Space tool again and begin placing spaces. On the Analyze ribbon, in the Spaces and Zones panel, I'll click Space. This time, when I move into the drawing area, the enclosed boundaries highlight, and the space fills the area when I move the cursor around. But before we place any spaces, we should take a look at the options in the Options bar and Contextual ribbon. In the Tag panel, Tag on Placement is selected by default. So when you place a space, you not only place the space element, but also place a tag that identifies that element. You can toggle Tag on Placement off if you wish. If you don't tag spaces when you initially place them, you can add tags later. I'll leave this toggled on. Also, in the Options bar, you can include a leader line if you wish, and also specify whether the tag is oriented horizontally or vertically, or will be oriented in the model. If it is set to Model, you can press the space bar to rotate the tag in 90-degree increments before placing the space. Space elements are actually three-dimensional. The space is not only bounded by the walls, but also at the top and bottom, either by the floor below and the floor above, or the floor below and the ceiling. If floors and ceilings are not yet placed in the model, the space can be bounded by the current level and an upper limit. You can specify these vertical limits either in the Options bar or in the Properties palette. So, for example, if ceilings have not been placed in the architectural model, you could set the upper limit to the intended ceiling height, or you could set the upper limit to the next level above. Or in the case of an atrium, you could specify the vertical extents. On the Options bar, in the Space drop-down, you can select New to place a new space or pick an existing space from the list of unplaced spaces. In this project, there are currently no unplaced spaces. To populate a list of spaces prior to placing space elements, you would create a space schedule, add rows to the schedule, and assign a space name to each row. You could also pre-populate the schedule with space numbers and other parameters. To place a space element, simply move the cursor into a bounded area in the building. Notice that Revit automatically detects the boundaries, which become highlighted. And since Tag on Placement is enabled, you can see a space tag. Simply click to place the space and the space tag. You can continue placing spaces in other enclosed areas in the model. And be aware that you can line up the space tags. As you place each space, notice that the space number is automatically incremented. Also, Revit highlights previously placed spaces so that you don't accidentally place a space in an area that has already been filled. If you do place a duplicate space, Revit displays a warning. Simply click Delete Spaces to delete the duplicate space element. However, when you delete a duplicate space, that space still exists in the model. To use that space, simply select it from the Space drop-down in the Options bar. When placing space elements, you can also have Revit show you which elements in the model are room bounding. In the contextual ribbon, if you click Highlight Boundaries, Revit highlights all of the room bounding elements, along with the architectural rooms, and displays a warning. Click the Close button to dismiss the warning, which also turns off the highlighting. You can also place spaces automatically. To do this, simply click Place Spaces Automatically in the contextual ribbon. This will place a space in all closed and bounded areas on the current level, according to the options specified in the Options bar. A dialog also appears afterward stating the number of spaces that have been created automatically. Simply click Close to close the dialog and finish the command. Take note of the fact that Revit has simply been tagging each space with the name Space. When I select a space and scroll down to the Identity Data section in the Properties palette, we can see the name and number. The room name and room number also appear here. Typically, the architect names and numbers all of the rooms, and the MEP team uses the same convention. However, it can take too much time to rename and renumber each space. There are a couple ways to quickly handle this. You can use an add-in, such as the Space Naming utility, to automatically match the space name and number to the room name and room number. Or you can use a space tag that references the room name and room number besides the space name and number. A tag like this can easily be created by modifying the standard space tag. If you select a tag, the tag highlights, and you can see the boundaries of the space. But if you delete the tag, only the tag is deleted. Revit displays a warning to tell you that the tag was deleted, but the corresponding space still exists. You can click anywhere in the drawing area to dismiss the warning. To replace the tag, in the Analyze ribbon, in the Spaces and Zones panel, click the Space Tag tool and then click inside the space whose tag you had deleted. Revit retags the space using the same space name and number originally assigned, because the tag gets this information from the space element, which still exists inside the space. Click Modify to end the command. If you want to modify the way area and volume is calculated, click on the Spaces and Zones panel to expand the drop-down. Then click Area and Volume Computations. Revit displays the Area and Volume Computations dialog. In the Volume Computations area, Revit is currently set to compute areas and volumes. You can change this to areas only, which is faster than computing both areas and volumes. However, you need the volume for heating and cooling loads. Also by default, room areas are computed based on the finished face of walls, but you can change this as well. I'll click Cancel to close this dialog.